Welcome to the Accidental Experts podcast. I'm your host, Bryce Hamilton. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a child and family therapist. I have been in practice for over 15 years, and I'm also a mom of 4. So I know the challenges both professionally and personally. I'm so glad that you're here today to grow your parenting toolbox. Please come as you are and be ready to learn. My goal is to make you the accidental expert so that you can raise healthy humans.
Parents, please be advised that this episode should be listened to by parents first, before sharing with your children. It's best to listen to the sensitive material in this episode first so that you're prepared to help support your children in navigating the conversations we're about to discuss. So if children are in your presence, please listen to this episode at another time.
Hi guys, welcome back. I hope that you're enjoying our episodes. Today we're going to talk to Michelle Denault. She is a national speaker and she goes around educating parents and kids and teachers and anybody who will listen about sexual abuse, how it happens. And today she's going to talk to us about body awareness and about how to keep our kids safe, what we can do as parents to protect our kids. With that, let's get to Michelle.
Thank you so much for having me. I feel grateful to be here.
Yeah, I'm so glad because you have such an important but hard job to talk about this stuff with us to help us be more educated so that we can have an awareness of how to keep our kids as safe as we can. So let's start with telling your story because I think this is an important part of understanding where you've come from and why you are an expert in this topic. So can you tell us a little bit about your own story?
Sure. When I was 14, I entered high school in a very small community. My graduating class was 44 kids. So as you can imagine, just a very small, tight-knit town. And the most popular teacher in the hall, the football coach, he was also my driver's ed teacher and my health teacher, oddly enough, began grooming me into a love relationship. And grooming is a 7-step process. It's not an overnight thing. He had to work very hard to get to sexual contact. But when I was about 15 was my first sexual contact. But he waited until my 17th birthday to have sex with me. And it wasn't my birthday. So my birthday will forever be a trigger in my trauma. But he did that because 17 is the age of consent in Illinois. So he was able to convince me that he hadn't committed a crime. Instead, he told me that I needed to keep our secret because he could lose his job for being unethical because he was having an extramarital affair. I spent a very long time, decades. I actually was with him until I was 24, which is it's not uncommon at all in grooming situations. Abusers instill loyalty into their victims to keep them there. And it looks like a love relationship. So you spend most of your life thinking you've just been in a boyfriend-girlfriend situation. This was my first love. And you never think of it any differently. And it took me until I was 44 to understand that I'd been abused and not loved. I just really was clueless up to that point. And once I figured that out, and that wasn't an instant moment either, it just really wasn't. And we don't have time to go into how that occurred. But once that happened, I really started looking at things and connecting with other survivors. And when you start to connect with other survivors and you hear your own story out of other people's mouth, it's devastating, number one. Number two, it's so eye-opening and trauma comes very quickly. I will always tell people that I wrote my trauma as it happened. I mean, I wrote it in real time as I was experiencing it. I did that for survival. That was my outlet. So I sat down and I'd write when I'd have a memory. And I look back on that now and it looked crazy. It really did. Trauma looks crazy. And I think it's important for the world to understand. We often look at people who are going through trauma as being crazy or unhinged, but they are just going through trauma and trying to survive. So I put all that down and I started advocating as I started to know more things, moved away from my hometown. It's funny how distance makes everything seem clear, as the song would say. And I really started to realize that I needed to bring accountability to my school district for their failures and to my abuser. So in 2018, I filed a litigation against my school district, New Berlin High School, and my abuser, Carol Owen Smith. And that has been going on. It'll be my 7th year. We'll be starting in September that I've been litigating. So about 2 years into that, my husband, who's a school superintendent, oddly, told me that I needed to find a distraction. And he put a whiteboard in our basement and told me, put your story on that. And over a couple years, I did that with whiteboard markers. I would put it on there and erase it, put it on there, add, put my story weaved into the grooming steps. Then I had a friend come over. She watched it. She just was totally taken with it. I put it on a slide and went to the local rape crisis center with it. And from there, I started speaking in schools. And since then, over the last 3.5 years, I've been in about 100 schools for staff. I've reached thousands of students. I'm sent to keynote this summer for the National Association of School Resource Officers in Phoenix, for the Indiana Resource Officers in June in Indianapolis. Just, it's really gone kind of crazy. It's been an amazing experience.
Thank you. Thank you for all of what you're doing and sharing your story and helping other people to understand what this looks like.
No, thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate your understanding of what this looks like.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, trauma is messy, right? And I
is.
think when we don't understand it, and especially when the person who experienced trauma doesn't understand it,
Right.
it's really hard. And, that's where therapists, right, or concerned family members or friends can be very valuable, but it's a sensitive time. It's hard.
It's uncomfortable for people. It's as I've always said, when you're going through trauma, no one brings a casserole. They just don't.
Yeah.
It's nobody's checking up on you. Nobody's making meals, even though you are in as much grief. I mean, you are grieving, losing sections of your life. It's like a death. It's a death unto yourself when you're grieving a trauma, especially child sexual abuse. And people just don't realize that it's just as hard for you to get up and make dinner. And they just think that life should go on. I think we need to be more compassionate and be more not sympathetic, because as Brene Brown said, it's empathy we need more than sympathy. And when we start to empathize and get in the ditch with people and sit with them in their moment, maybe we would become a better society and have more understanding.
Yeah, I love that analogy of like, sometimes being a good friend isn't about helping the person out, but sitting in it with them.
Yes. Faith Colson of Faith Saw, I'll text her and say, I'm in the ditch today. And she's always said, I can't fix it, but I can get in the ditch with you and sit with you through it. So I love that.
Yes, that's amazing. I think that was such a good analogy for me when I first heard it, of like, I mean, like, that's what you want sometimes, is like, I'll get out. Like, when I am in a place where I can put some steps together, I can walk out of this. But
right.
I sometimes just need somebody to sit with me in it. Doesn't mean you have to do something. Sometimes it's being the potted plant, right? Just being there, present in that part. But that's Dr. Becky Bailey, who talks about being the potted plant as a parent.
I love
but
that.
Like it's sometimes about that as a friend too. So let's talk about what your thoughts are on how we can protect our kids from sexual abuse or unwanted sexual contact. And I know it's hard to do this because when we say kids, that's such a huge spectrum of ages, right? So we have elementary school, we have middle, and we have high school. And so the developmental stages are changing. So I know this is a big question, but in general, right? Or you are welcome to get specific, but like, what do you think we can do to help protect our kids?
Well, when I talk in my all-day training, I say one of the biggest debates out there right now is teaching your kids about body boundaries, right? That's a huge debate on the internet right now. A lot of parents think that it's up to them to teach their kids about body safety. And unfortunately, parents often wait until they think their kids are ready, which I'm going to be bold, honest with you here. It's more like when parents are ready, because that's just not a comfortable topic for us as parents. When I train, I ask people, how many of you have talked to your kids about sex? And in a room of 50 people, maybe 2 people raise their hand. They're just not comfortable with it. So if we wait to teach our kids until they're ready or we're ready, predators don't mind teaching your kids what you haven't taught them yet. And it's very important from the beginning for them to understand that their body belongs to them. And why that's important is because if they don't have those boundaries established, they're less likely to understand what those boundaries are. Children will often say to me when I say to littles, who does your body belong to? They'll say God, or they'll say mom and dad. And I explain to them, no, your body belongs to you, because many kids have been abused by a parent, a grandparent, whoever it may be, a family member, or somebody within the church in the name of God, or in the name of your body belongs to mommy or daddy. So
Mhm.
we have to explain to our kids that their body is theirs. It's their space. And even a way to do it is to offer them the chance for consent. Instead
Mhm.
of just walking in and hugging your child, say, "Do you mind if I hug you today?"
Mhm.
Because I don't know about you, but there's days I come home and I don't want somebody to hug me. I don't. And children are human beings. I know they're
Yes.
littles and we think they want all this love and attention all the time, but they are humans with their own little personalities, and not every kid wants you to grab them and hug them. It's very important that they know that they have control of that, that they can say, "I don't want to hug grandma when I leave." There may not be nothing wrong with grandma. On the
Right.
flip side, there might be. And so we need to let them know that they have the right to their own body. They get to choose who touches it, when they touch it, and how they touch it. And that needs to start when they're very little. And moving into a little bit older, what I think is really important about consent, I often hear people say if you teach consent in healthy relationships, you're giving kids permission to have sex. It's the opposite of that. It is very much the opposite of that. If you teach a kid that coercion is not consent, and you say, for instance, on prom night, "If you don't have sex with me, I'm going to break up with you." That's not consent. That's coercion. And I teach kids about that in healthy relationships. And I explain to them that you never can be coerced into having sex with somebody. That is not a healthy relationship. If you teach your kids that, they are less likely to have sex because they know they don't have to give of themselves to get love. I think we often consider our children's bodies gifts to be given when we talk about girls saving themselves and giving themselves away. And I really don't think we should consider our children's bodies a gift to be given to somebody else. I feel like we should let them know that their body is theirs
Mhm.
and they get to choose when that happens. And it should never be coerced from them.
Yeah, the gift is for themselves. Their
Yes,
body is
absolutely.
their body. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, and I think, and I would say on that, in terms of parents feeling like kids, like if you talk about sex, that they're going to have it. The reality is that in my practice, I have heard about, talk to kids who have had sex and their parents don't know, right?
Right.
And they're pretty young, and there have been times where kids have had sex in front of their school. And
Yeah.
I mean, so in the bushes, right? So,
Right.
I mean,
Right.
right. So it's like, and that's also something we don't really want for our kids, right? And who knows
Right.
what the circumstances were in that. But I think it's naive and to think that just not talking about it or not having knowledge means they won't do it. It just actually means that they're more likely to be curious and they
Yes.
might engage in something that they actually don't want to,
Right.
because they don't know enough about it. And so it is our job as parents to have these conversations, even though it's uncomfortable. And we can
Yes.
say, we can name that. I think it's okay for parents to say, my mom or dad didn't talk to me about this.
Right.
So it's really uncomfortable for me to do this, but this is really important. And also, it's not a one-time conversation. We don't just sit
No,
down and we're
absolutely not.
like, today we're having this conversation and then, okay, done
We're
with
done.
that. Yeah. It's that it is a conversation that is evolving.
Right.
And kids are curious. I remember when I was pregnant with my second daughter, or my first daughter, and my son was like, "How did the baby get in there?" And he was 4. And I was like, "Yeah, we're gonna have to have this conversation." And then it was like I explained all the things, I showed all the pictures. I have great books for talking to kids about bodies and understanding the process. And then he was like, "Okay, I get the sperm and the egg, and it's in your belly. And how did the sperm get in there?" And I was like, "Oh, dang it." Like,
I
and
wasn't ready for
I
that.
wasn't ready for that. So like I certainly appreciate, like I didn't think I was going to be educating my 4-year-old, but like we can also say this is not something we're talking to our friends about, right? Like
Right.
this is a conversation where if you have a question, talk to mommy and daddy, or like these are safe people to talk to about this. But I think, and honestly, my kids have never violated that rule. Now, I'm not saying that every kid wouldn't. I mean, I can also honestly say I was the kid who knew about sex in kindergarten, and when the girl said to me sex was holding hands, I was like, Hold on, sister. Actually, that's not. That is not
That's
what
not
this
what it
is.
is.
And her mom was not thrilled with that. But my mom got a phone call and was like, your kid should not be educating mine, which I don't disagree with. But the reality is that kids are going to educate each other. And if we
Absolutely.
are the parents who do the education, we actually get to set the narrative. We get to teach them about it in a healthy way, and it's not misinformation or misunderstanding. So I think that education piece is so important. So can we
Well, think
protect our
about
kids? I'm sorry, go ahead.
really quick, think about the shame component there. Like when I do a training, I ask people, how many of you really saved yourself for marriage? How many there, and I say, don't raise your hand to that. I want you to think about that. You are not talking to your kids because you don't want them to do this, but how many of you did it? And then I ask, how many of you told your parents you had sex? I'm sorry, but there's very few people in your audience that would be able to say, I told my parents everything. That just
Mm-hmm.
doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
Kids, even good kids, just don't tell their parents everything. It
Yeah.
looks more like this. You're 40 years old, it's Christmas, you walk in, you look at mom and you go, hey, mom, let me tell you about that thing I did when I was 15 years old with my brother. That's what it looks like. And
Mm-hmm.
people who prey on children, they know that. And I try to tell people, these people come in and become your kid's adult best friend. So the problem is that we don't talk about it. We're not willing to talk about it, or we make it shameful. One of the things I really hit on is please use the correct body parts. It is a penis, it is a vagina. Because when we make sex shameful to our children, when something horrible happens, they think that they are responsible for that because it was made to be shameful. That's why it's so important for us to sit down and talk to them and make it the narrative that is the right one, instead of leaving them to think that there's something shameful about this
Mm-hmm.
situation, because that can really get you into trouble when a kid has something bad happen to them and they've been told not to tell.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a trick, right? That gets used
Absolutely.
is in like threats and all these kind of things that are terrible for kids. And they think that they're protecting us because a predator might threaten your family or a pet or whatever. And then they're protecting us. But really we want them to tell so that we can get help. So, I mean, do you think that we can protect our kids from sexual abuse and unwanted sexual contact? This is such a hard
That's
question. I know.
it is a rough question. With your littles, I do think that body safety is incredibly important to that protection. Do I think we can totally eliminate this from happening? That would be a beautiful day, wouldn't it? I'm not sure if we can eliminate this from happening, but I think that we can prevent a whole lot of it by giving them the knowledge. I also think that the reason that is because if you give them the knowledge and they tell, you're preventing it from happening to other children. You're stopping. The average predator can have up to 75 victims in their lifetime. So if you think about that first child reporting that immediately, you've saved 74 kids possibly from having to live with the trauma
Mm,
of sexual abuse. So that to me is why prevention is so incredibly important. When it comes to teens and preteens, and especially in situations like mine, when you're talking about the threats and people saying, if you tell, and for me, I was in love with my abuser, and often in institutional settings, churches, youth groups, any kind of sporting, athletic venues where there's coaches with athletes or teachers with students that are in that preteen to teen era, these kids really think they're in love relationships with these people. So a 17-year-old girl's brain. I mean, they think that they know everything, teenagers do, and they
yeah.
don't want to hear anything about it. And when they're in love, they think they're in love, and it doesn't matter what anybody else tells them. Do I think that we can stop those things from happening to them? Once again, I think education is incredibly, if not even more important in this area. Because when I train students on grooming, the light bulb that comes on, not just with adult authority figures abusing kids, but peer on peer grooming and sexual assault. I've had so many disclosures on that. The light bulb that comes on when I run through the steps. If we can turn on the light bulb before the moment, yes, I do think that we can stop it from happening to a lot of kids. But secondary to that is if we can turn on the light bulb for their peers,
Mhm.
because bystander intervention in these moments is one of the most important things. I hit on that with kids. You are not snitching. If you know a friend this is happening to, you need to go find an adult to tell, because your friend may think like I did. No, I'm special. He loves me. This isn't, what do he loves me. No person wants to think that this is anything more than this great love relationship in their life. Even as we're adults, right? How many women have been abused in their adult lives, or men?
Mm-hmm.
It's important to teach our kids to go get help if they see these situations. And I truly think that kids that aren't in the heart of it are more likely to go get help if you
Mm-hmm.
teach them what it looks like. I truly do.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense as to like, because I think we do see our friends doing things and we hear about something and we're like, there's something up there, or this doesn't feel quite right. And if we don't know what healthy relationships look like, right?
Right.
If we're not aware of that, and why when we're young, why it would be odd for somebody who's 20 to be interested in somebody who's 14, or different ages, but it's like as an adult, we look at that and we're like, that's unusual, right? There's no reason, like you're in totally different developmental stages, and we can see that as an outsider, but inside it, it feels like love, and
Well, and
that's what they know.
once you're inside it as a child, I try to explain this to people when I tell that I didn't disclose till I was 44. I didn't understand until I was 44. A kid who lives in trauma as a child, that's their compass. It's their normal.
Mm-hmm.
Unless somebody literally comes to you and says, you know, this was child abuse or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
And I don't even know if a lot of people would even accept that who've been groomed into a love relationship.
Yeah.
Once you are in that normal thing, in one of your pivotal points of development, that is what normal is to you.
Yeah.
It was not abnormal to me. To me, it was, people thought Romeo and Juliet shouldn't have been together, but Romeo and Juliet didn't think that.
Mm-hmm.
So
Sure.
once you are in that state of mind continues for you for a very, very long time.
Mm-hmm.
And the average age of disclosure for kids who are in situations like that is age 50, actually. It takes them a very long time. Even kids who were abused in the church truly were made to believe and spent decades believing they did that for the goodness of God. I show a video to students, and it's a family component. It's a girl who has an uncle that's grooming her. And in the video, she says it's easier to see when it's happening to someone else. So that's why I think that piece of teaching all of our kids about what grooming looks like in all situations. Your traditional grooming model works around fear, that the abuser will instill fear into the child. If you tell, I'll kill you. If you tell, I'll kill your parents. If you tell, I'll lie and humiliate you. No one will believe you. But when a kid's being groomed into a love relationship, or that abuser is becoming their adult best friend, and they really love them, or they think it is their best friend, they're not using fear. They're using love. And that's a powerful emotion. It becomes emotional blackmail. So we have to show the people that are outside of that what this looks like. And I'll tell you, my former coworker used to do a cool thing with that video. The uncle gives her a bracelet she's had online that she loves. That's part of the grooming process, right? Gift giving. And he's like, oh, yeah, I saw it online. Thought you'd want it. And every kid in the room's like, oh, that's creepy, And my colleague would say, well, yeah, that's because I'm here today. That's why you think that's creepy. But if you were on Snapchat or Instagram and said, oh gosh, I just dying for a 10-piece nug and a Coke, and an hour later, your best friend dropped off nuggets and a Coke at your front door, would you think that was creepy? And they're all like, no. So she was trying to get them to see that from that lens, she did not see that as creepy. She just thought it's her uncle doing something nice for her, not as part of a grooming process. So I think it's so important for us to show the bystander what to look for, because the person who's in the moment is not seeing clearly. And they also don't see clearly for a very long time. It can take them decades to understand that. It's important that we let other people know what to do. And sadly, adults don't always do the right thing. They just don't. So it's really important for us to let peers know what this looks like as well, so they can help a friend if they need to. We teach them about suicide prevention, don't we? And bullying prevention. Why would we ever? We don't mind terrifying them and teaching them how to hide in their school from a shooter. Your odds of being killed in a school shooting are 1 in 2 million. Your odds of being abused in your school are 1 in 10. Why are we not teaching our kids how to keep themselves safe from predatory behavior? It boggles my mind. It really does.
Yeah. I mean, especially with those statistics. I mean, that
Yeah,
is alarming. Well, and I think, I was just thinking about like, okay, so an uncle could give their niece something nice and there's no intention behind it. And if you say
absolutely.
something, right, of like, oh, that's odd, nothing bad happens if it's something that is okay, right?
Right,
Like you
right.
draw attention to that thing and they're like, oh, actually, it's okay. It's kind of like you call the police and everything's fine. You thought something's wrong at
Yes.
your neighbor's house and, like you called because like you heard something screaming and it was just, they were having fun in the backyard, right? Like it was something harmless. Then it's like all is well. We're
It's
okay,
better
right?
to
So,
it's better to explore it than it is to ignore it. That's
yes.
what I always tell people. When people talk about false accusations, I tell them it takes an act of God, usually, that just from your one phone call, it's going to take more than that. They
Hmm.
don't put people in prison like that for that stuff without having the evidence to do what they need to do. It is the job of child services to figure that out and the job of the police to figure that out. It's not your job to make the
Hmm.
call on that.
Yeah. Yeah. Even as a therapist, we are told that our job is not to be investigators. We
Yes,
report child abuse when we suspect, right? We don't
not
have to be
proven, just
definitive.
suspected.
We
Yep.
just suspect that there is
Yes.
something that is criminal happening, right? That is
Yes.
somebody is some type of danger is happening, right? Whether it is psychological, physical, emotional, right? That is happening. Sometimes there is evidence, right? They have a bruise or whatever and it matches the story, but we're not there to investigate. That is the job of police and children's services. I
Totes.
agree. And so that kind of eases the burden because sometimes I know that even in our profession, therapists will feel bad about reporting things. And I'm always like, this is just this is our job, right? And let's let the professionals figure it out because once they do and they decide yes or no, then that's it.
You've
Like
done your job.
we did our
Yes.
job, right? Like my part is making the call or, filling out the form, making the report. And I get that it's scary, but like we have to do it to protect our children and
Yes. And
people that are vulnerable.
I really want to hit on what you said about, if there's bruises, there's physical abuse. So you have to report that. I really want people to understand that when a child is being groomed and abused, they are not, it is not a physical component. Okay. This
Hmm.
is, people are so stuck on abuse just being hitting, yelling, violence. But a lot of people abuse with love, not fear, and they're manipulating that child's brain. It is the emotional damage that they are doing to that child's brain. So if you suspect that that's going on, that damage is just as tremendous as the physical abuse. Because to get to the physical abuse, there has to be that emotional abuse anyway. You have to have that component there too. So I really want people to understand that just because you can't see a physical aspect does not mean that you should not report if you suspect that a child is in a situation where they're being emotionally or sexually abused in any way.
Hmm. Yeah, and if a kid tells you something, right? Like,
Yes,
and then it's like, let's investigate it. Let's not sit on this, right? Let's figure out what is going on because the chances of a kid telling something's happening when it's not
it's rare,
rare. Yeah.
slim to
And
none, slim to none.
yeah, I mean, I
Yeah,
think, I could, in my long years of practice, I could say, there have been extenuating circumstances that do defy the odds, but that is, I can think of one. Right.
right.
So it's like on all the time, even in my time directly in sexual abuse, yeah, one. And so that is, I mean, obviously I'm not all, but I think we need to believe our kids. So what do we need to have our kids know in order to protect themselves? We kind of talked about this, but like, what do you think kids need to be aware of in order to protect themselves?
Well, as far as the preteen and the teen ages when it comes to grooming, I an adult should never want to have sex with a child. They shouldn't. It's and to explain that to your children that is not normal for an adult to want to have it. It's not about sex, first of all. As we all know, sexual violence is about control. This is a control issue. So I think it's incredibly important for us to sit down with our kids and talk about the difference between a mentoring relationship with an authority figure and something that's crossing a line that
Hmm.
shouldn't cross a line. And I never want to take a mentoring situation away from somebody. There's kids that absolutely need their teachers, their coaches. One of my favorite quotes is, sometimes kids need sports more than sports need kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I never want to take that away, but you should never have an adult that wants to spend alone time with a child away from their classmates, away from their teammates. These are things we got to give our kids the red flags of. You should not be having lunch in the office of a teacher every day like I was.
Mm-hmm.
This is a red flag. They should not be giving you gifts. Now, we have kids that need shoes at a school district I worked at. I get that. But as far as like gift giving in the realm of a teacher giving you a locket or something like this, is not normal behavior. This is part of the grooming process. There's a lot of things that we can sit down and tell our kids. Are they necessarily going to get it when we're parents telling our kids? I don't know about that, because I think that that's why it's important for people like me to come in and talk to students, because the one way that I draw students in is I say, how many of your parents have said to you, just you wait till you grow up? You think you've got it bad now. Our kids don't think we get them. They don't. It doesn't matter how good of a parent you are or how much you love your children. You didn't think your parents got you, did you? Did your parents know everything you did when you were a kid? Absolutely not. Mine didn't know either.
No.
So we don't think our parents get us when we're kids, but they may listen to an outside influence.
Mm-hmm.
So to teach them those things, you should never, your coach should never be offering you rides away from everybody else. They should not be texting you individually.
Mm-hmm.
A group chat, if you're on a sports team, is fine, but there is no one-on-one. That is not normal. It is not appropriate. Mm-hmm. So just telling kids about those things, giving them those flags. Also, the thing that I really hit with kids is how they interview a victim. I tell kids they're looking for a response. So we need to teach our kids how this escalates. It goes from, you've got a great smile, to, my God, you are so much more mature than your peers, to, are you wearing anything under that dress? And they're looking for a response. Mm-hmm. And in the video I show, it shows the uncle talking to her about boys. And she goes, oh, boys aren't interested in me. And he goes, sure they are. Just give them what they want to see. And her cheeks get really red. That's the response he was waiting for. Predators are waiting for that response from your children. And their response is nothing they've done wrong. It's who they are. And I tell kids that, but they are absolutely waiting for it. They are escalating that situation, pushing the outside of that envelope, trying to desensitize that child to see how far they can push it before they move into sexual contact. Giving our kids those signs, those red flags, are so important. The other thing I really, really hit on with red flags is I had the privilege of working with kids in two different ways. I did grooming and then healthy relationships within like a 2-week span. And it was cool because they were getting it, right? They're seeing that all the things that we've taught our kids were healthy could be used to abuse, right? Mm-hmm. So I asked them a series of questions. How many of you have heard a safe adult say, well, she must like it because she keeps going back to him? And over 50% of the kids in the room raised their hand to that every time. 50% of kids had heard a safe adult blame somebody for getting beaten up. And then I said, how many of you have heard, well, if she wouldn't have worn that, or if she hadn't have gone there, from your safe adults? 80% of kids on average raised their hand to that every time. They'd heard a safe adult blame somebody for their sexual assault. And then I said, okay, so I don't know your parents. I always qualify with that. How many of you have heard your parent, grandparent, whoever it may be, say to you in your house, we don't have to worry about that with you though. We know you know better than that. We know you were raised better than that. We know you would never. 100% of kids raise their hand to that. They've heard their parents say that in some situation. And I tell parents, listen to me, that is dangerous. As well-meaning as it is, you are not giving your children the red flags of abuse because they're thinking to themselves that they were raised better. Mm-hmm. They know better. They'll never let somebody treat them like that. Mm-hmm. So they're not looking for the red flags of abuse. And abuse, especially is very sneaky, especially grooming. They're not looking for those signs because you've told them you've raised them better than that. And one of two things happens. Something really bad happens and they have no idea how to get out of it or tell, or they become the next generation of victim blamers, right? And we don't need any more of those. the final question I asked was, what happens when something bad does happen and your parents have said that? And I had one boy in the class look straight past me and say, we're not going to tell our parents because we should have known better. We were raised better than that. They're going to be disappointed. I wish my mom had been here today. That got me in the gut as a parent. The one thing we can do as parents is to accept that our kids are human beings and to always let them know that anything can happen at any given time. Sometimes you can do all the right things and not get the right result. And no matter what, we are going to support them. And we know bad things happen to all kids, and give them those red flags. Help them look for what to look for in abusive situations. I think that's incredibly important.
Yeah. Oh, wow. I mean, that's a lot, right? I think as a parent, like
Yeah.
hearing this as as myself, right? Like, I think that's a lot to process, of just recognizing that there are things that we do that are well-meaning, but we can do better. And I think the whole point of all of this, all of what I'm doing here, is I want us to do better. Like, there's so many things that so many experts know, and not all parents have access to this information. So it's just good for us to hear this. And it might be good for us to listen to this 12 different times, right? To go
Right.
back and hear the stuff of like, oh yeah, my parent said that to me. Like,
Yes.
I think, and so like, but I can do something different. I want to do better.
Just even
Right.
flip your language, right? Can you
Yeah.
just flip your language? Like, how many of us say when I drop my stepdaughter off at college, don't put your drink down at a party. Don't take a drink from somebody else. Don't wear your headphones when you're walking across campus. Don't look down. You need to tell your kids those things. You
Sure.
do. But when you say, don't, what happens when something bad happens to them?
Mm-hmm.
They feel like they've done something wrong because you told them not to do it.
Sure.
So instead say, well, you're at a party, make sure you go get your own drink. Don't say, don't do this. Say,
Mm-hmm.
carry your drink around with you all night. Just flip the narrative just slightly, but then say to them, but I want you to understand that you've never done anything wrong if you're abused or assaulted, ever. Call your mom.
Mm-hmm.
If anything happens, you could do all the right things, or even you could set your drink down and you still have not done anything wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Pick up a phone. I flip the language just a little. Don't tell your kids what not to do.
Mm-hmm.
Show them what to do. And
Yeah.
that makes them less likely to feel ashamed. I had a mom in Chicago come up to me and tell me tearfully her daughter didn't tell her for 10 years she'd been raped, and they were best friends. And she asked her, why wouldn't you have told me? And her daughter said, because you always said I was a good girl. And I was afraid that you would be disappointed in me. As well-meaning as our beautiful language is when we're talking how great our kids are compared to that kid down the street, our well-meaning words can be a prison for our kids if they become abused or assaulted. They really can. So it's hard. It is. I've made these mistakes with my kids,
Mm-hmm.
but being able to train and see kids now and hear their stories, I want to show you how to flip the narrative just a little, so your kids will make sure that they know you're a safe space, no matter what.
Yeah.
No matter what.
Well, and part of being that safe space too, though, is also maybe not judging the other kids who are doing the
Absolutely.
things, right?
Absolutely.
And thinking like my kids will sometimes say, so and so did whatever, and I am like, how do you feel about that? What do you think's going on? Like, and also opening the door to say, like, it sounds like some really hard things are happening for them.
Right.
I wonder
Right.
what could be happening, right? So not that we should tolerate kids acting badly towards our kids, right? We do have a right to and a responsibility to protect our kids, but also about opening this door to like there could be other things happening, right? And that
Right.
just because you make a bad choice doesn't mean you're a bad person. We talk about that all of the time in our house. That's Brene Brown's
Yeah.
perspective
I
on
love her.
that, and I love her too. But it's like, my kid, I'll say it like sometimes I'm like, that was a poor choice, right? Like
Right.
that, unfortunately,
Well,
but like, let's get through it, right? But that
right.
doesn't make you a bad kid.
No, and we also have to realize that the thing that we have trouble accepting is not everybody in the world's values are aligned with ours. Like not
Sure.
everybody has the same ideals or values or religious beliefs or whatever it may be. We are we were supposed to be a melting pot of people, right? So our cultures can be so different. So another question I always ask kids is, how many of you have heard your parent diss on the neighbor for something they did that, and they all raise their hand. And I say, was it because they were a bad person, or they just didn't believe the same things they believed? And they go, well, they just don't believe the same things my parents believe. Okay, well, as kids, they're watching their adults put down other people for just having a different set of beliefs or values, or wearing something different, or living differently. And that makes kids fall into a situation where they may judge other people. And that gets into bullying situations. It really, really does. It's the highest form of bullying, in my opinion. And then when kids get in bad situations, they don't know how to tell that parent what's happened, because they've seen them judge another kid for the bad situation. I've raised two children, 25 and 23. And one of my favorite expressions, when people would say, well, I would let my kid would never. They would never. I'm a good parent. I check my kids' texts. And in my training, I use this. I say, well, I got news for you. If you're a good parent, you're probably not letting your kids do half the things that normal kids want to do. And they probably think you're an idiot half the time. I mean, how many times a week your kids roll their eyes at you? And this is the open door for predators to come in once again, because, if they let your kids do the things that all normal kids want to do, could be listening to a music you don't let them listen to, or going to a movie. But I've heard so many people say those kind of things. My kid would never, they wouldn't do that. And my favorite expression was, we actually have a sign painted in our garage right now that says, here sits my dumbass kid that did this. So they were suspended from school. And we didn't have a sign. My point was, I don't want to ever think my child is not going to make that mistake. It would be ignorant of me to not think my child's a human who is going through the human child, adolescent, teenage experience, young adult experience, and that they're not going to do things. We are so opposite. We love the song, how are you ever going to be old and wise if you're not young and crazy? But we want to judge kids who do young and crazy things, which is natural because their brain is not developed. So instead of judging other kids and letting our kids see that, we need to be more careful to look more at the fact that they're just kids and they all make mistakes, and give our kids that safe space to say when they do make a mistake.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good advice. Okay, so how do we start this conversation with our kids? How do we introduce this? You talked about like knowing about our bodies, knowing our body is ours, right? It's maybe not viewing it as like this gift thing, but like, how do we start the conversation with our kids about body awareness?
Well, usually most kids have body safety programs when they're little in schools through Aaron's Law. I think that's a good time. I really do. Like, if you know your child has had a body safety program at their school, this is a good time to sit down and talk to your child and say, hey, what did you learn today? Let's expand on that. That is the perfect open door to do that. Or I've known people that actually have just started body safety with their littles themselves. And that has led to disclosures. A huge case down here in the Southern Illinois area that led to a disclosure. Grandma talked about body safety, and the little girl offhandedly said, well, my dad does that, without even understanding. She was 3. But take that opportunity when they're little, and then they're going to be used to those conversations, right? So start having those conversations as it goes along. Any opportunity that you have, if you see a situation on the news, sit down and talk to your kids about that. I mean, you cannot open a newspaper right now without seeing somebody that has been implicated in some kind of child sex abuse or sexual assault or whatever. Take those opportunities to sit down and open up that conversation with your kids. Your older kids, give them the floor. Give them the floor for a minute. Don't preach to them. Let them say how they feel, or what, let them ask you questions. If you yourself are a survivor of anything, please don't be afraid to let your kids know that. You don't have to go into gory details, but let your kids know, that you understand that these situations happen. I would take any opportunity I could to talk to my kids about keeping their body safe, about their body belongs to them when they become little kids. As they start to get older, we're talking 12 is the average age of grooming. I'd really sit down and talk to them And it's a hard conversation to have about the people in their life. To start that conversation, take them to the mall. Do something to just kind of ease into that conversation where it's comfortable, but start talking about the adults in their life that they trust. Because we don't do that. We talk about stranger danger, and 93% of the time, the victim will know and trust the assailant. Don't be afraid to tell your kids that the people who they trust and respect the most could be the ones that are trying to abuse them. Start with that door. Look something up online. There's tons of resources out there. I would be happy to send resources to any parent to how to talk to your kid about grooming. I have books that are great. There's several books about grooming, peer-on-peer violence. That Unmasking Sexual Con Games is one that I love for preteens and teens. There's a book called Breathing Underwater, which a lot of kids start to read when they're juniors in high school. It's a required reading for some schools. It's about peer-on-peer abuse and grooming and violence. Find some resources. Go to your local CAC. Call your local rape crisis center. Take your kid to something that one of these people may have. CACs and rape crisis centers are putting on stuff all the time. Go to those. Open up that conversation with your kid. It can be as simple as seeing somebody with a t-shirt on like I have on right now, sexual assault awareness. Hey, let's talk about that. Open up the conversation right there. But there is plenty of resources out there. There's plenty of movies for your teens and preteens. I highly recommend several documentaries. The Hunting Ground, Audrey and Daisy. Put these things on, watch them with your child, open up the conversation. Mm-hmm. The best way to do it is to have a pre-entry into that instead of going, we're going to talk about sex today. just have that moment set aside. Don't do it in a hurry. Have a moment set aside where you can be open to questions, and do not try your best to not be shocked when they ask you questions that are shocking. And try your best. Like you said, you weren't ready to talk about semen. You weren't ready to talk about the sperm and the egg. But even though you're not ready for that, when they sit down and talk to you, make yourself ready. Mm-hmm. Don't run away from it. Get comfortable with the uncomfortable. Because if you got a kid that's willing to sit there and listen to you, and they're willing to tell you what's going on, make time for that kid. Yeah. Make time. Carve out the space. And if you don't know what to say in that moment, say, let me get on the computer. Let's look up some resources about that. They are everywhere. If you're in Illinois, even if you're not in Illinois, we have a website for Faith's Law. It's FAITH, Faith's Law. There's a resource guide. Every school in Illinois has it on their website as a resource. It is a resource guide for parents. They can go to it and it shows them every rape crisis center, every CAC, Spider, which is another thing you can call for resources, Safe to Help, which is another resource, the suicide hotline. It talks about grooming behaviors. So you as a parent can go on and find those things, download them, and sit down and talk to your kids about that. There's tons of resources out there.
Fantastic. I'm glad that we're in this place where people are talking about it, because that is protecting kids and teens. Obviously we need more, but we're making some efforts. Right. How do we keep our kids talking about their bodies? Right. So so when they're young and we're talking about that, as they move into the teen years and tween years, I think there is a tendency to get more private. How do we keep them talking about that?
That's a tough question. It really, really is. And I'd love to say it's relational. I would. My 25-year-old son told me everything in his life. My 23-year-old, very private. Mm-hmm. I was the same mother for both kids. So a lot of that is personality driven. It really, really is. It doesn't necessarily have to do with your parenting. You may have a kid that's just more open and free with you, and a kid that's not. But I think talking about their bodies can begin with talking about body positivity. Mm-hmm. I think that's important, and from a very young age at this point, because one of the risk factors of child sex abuse is low self-esteem. And I laugh about that. And I tell my audience, do you know any kids with high self-esteem? I mean, have you been on the playground lately? I mean, it starts when they're 4. Hard. And then we got kids, we got kids in competitive sports. Their parents are on the sidelines going, I didn't pay $1,000 for you. It's just, a lot of pressure. Kids have a lot of stress, and social media. Everybody on social media is beautiful. They've got the perfect life. Their bodies are great. You got kids like, I show a picture of myself. My teeth weren't together yet. My mom gave me this terrible poodle perm. Shout out to my mom, by the way. I'm never going to forgive her for that. But we all are, body positivity for children is so hard these days. Start with that very young, and then open those conversations as they start to get a little bit older. Talk about, how are you feeling about that today? Or, is there anything I can do to help you feel better about your body? And give them the opportunity to tell you what is bothering them about their body, and see if that will open up more conversations about that. One of my favorite stories of my daycare kids was I had a little girl who was very much a princess and a little girl who was very much a sports girl, boy clothes and the little girl who was the princess was 5, and she looked at the other one who was 7. She goes, "Why do you dress like a boy? Why do you wear that?" And it's 7 years old. This little girl looked at her and said, "I like who I am. I like how I dress. There's nothing wrong with me not wanting to wear dresses all the time." And I know that her mother had taught her that. We sometimes put our kids in a box, what they should be. Let your kids find their box and let them know that they are who they are loved as who they are, and that their bodies are beautiful as they are. Don't try to shove them in a societal box. That's when I think we open up positive conversations with our kids about their bodies. I really do. We give them the opening.
Yeah.
I hope that made sense.
Yes, that all is really great information and a lot for us to just process. So thank you so much for being here today to introduce this topic to us about
Thank you for having
kids keeping their bodies safe and awareness. So thank you.
I know I'm incredibly chatty. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm incredibly passionate about the whole thing. So
yes,
thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
We'll have you back soon.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks again, Michelle. That was a fantastic conversation. I know that there is a lot of data in this, and thinking about how to keep our kids safe and about talking to them about topics that make us uncomfortable as parents. But I would really encourage you to look at the resources, use this conversation, decide how you and whomever else is involved in your kid's life are going to educate them to keep them safe. With that, I'll say thank you so much for today. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, and also keep the emails coming. Subscribe to our show and give us a rating. If you want to reach out for a topic, send an email to accidentalexperts@gmail.com. Thank you so much for your time today. Looking forward to seeing you next week. Some words from our legal team.
The information presented in this podcast is not intended or implied to be a substitute for appropriate professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment. All content, including text, graphics, images, and information contained on or available through this podcast, is for general information purposes only. This podcast makes no representations and assumes no responsibility for the accuracy or information on or available through this podcast, and such information is subject to change without notice. You are encouraged to confirm any information obtained through this program with other sources and review all information regarding any condition or treatment with the appropriate professionals.
What we're saying is, yes, I am a real therapist, but I'm not your therapist.